Okay, so now we get to one of my favorite chapters, pricing and advertising. I don't really like the advertising part of it, but I really do like the pricing part of it. Again, this combined with chapter 18, our last chapter, is really kind of the focus of my dissertation from long ago. I'll try to contain my excitement over this general topic. Um, we're generally taught, or we should be hopefully taught as people, that discrimination is a bad thing. But in terms of, as an economist, when we're looking at, um, when we're looking at monopolies and how they behave, discrimination is actually a good thing. So we're going to focus a good deal of our time in this chapter talking about various forms of price discrimination. Why do we do it? Well, and what is it? Pricing discrimination pricing discrimination is all about different prices for different customers. And my computer is unhappy right now, for different prices for different customers. So the idea is that we're going to have different degrees of price discrimination to the extent that we try to differentiate between more kinds of customers. So what we looked at in the previous chapter was that we had uniform pricing, what I had called a single price monopolist. And with a single price monopolist, they charge the same price to every customer, one price. For non-uniform pricing, what we see is that there are different prices for the same product for different kinds of customers. And so that price discrimination then becomes an area where an economist would have some role in talking about, would be able to provide some service to the monopolist in terms of how they price their product. And firms should want to be price discriminators because it's going to mean that they can charge higher prices. What it does is it allows me as a monopolist to avoid having to lower my price for all customers when I try to sell more. Instead, what I would just need to do is I would just need to try to find a way to segment my customers. And to the extent that I can segment them, I can I can create a situation where some of my consumers are paying higher prices than others. Um, and so monopolists then can invest amount of time and money in segmenting customers. So as one example here, we can kind of see with we can kind of see here with movie theaters, which typically have like senior citizen prices or college student prices. We can see that there's a benefit to segmenting these markets. And what you would have to do is you would have to find some way to identify that individual, right? So you could have them show an ID, or you could look them up and down and say, wow, you're really old, so you're a senior citizen. Right? And so then what I would do is charge them different prices. But by doing that, by engaging in price discrimination, rather than just charging everyone $5 or everyone $10, by engaging in price discrimination, I can earn more total profit. So it's going to make some sense for them to spend the money to figure out who my customer groups are and try to enforce it. I'll make more money in the long run by doing that. And so, right, what it does by charging these different prices, and this is kind of highlighted here in the notes here, is that what it does is it ensures that my senior citizens, right, who are maybe poor, and my college students who are maybe poor, are going to pay lower prices than me, right? A person who is an adult and has a job, and um, I'm going to be able to capture them as customers. And as long as what they're paying exceeds the cost of providing the product, I'm going to make more money because I'm still going to be able to charge the adults the full price. And now I'm going to be able to capture the extra customers that just come from being college students or senior citizens. I'm still going to have a way to charge them a price, just not as high as one otherwise. So for firms, so with these advantages then that we can see from firms price discriminating, we can then see that we have to have a certain number of conditions that we need to satisfy in order for it to make sense to price discriminate. Well, one, the firm has to have some degree of market power. Two, there has to be some way in which we would identify those firms, those groups of consumers as being different from one another, meaning that they have different demand curves that then allow us to make sense of and to be able to determine what their different prices should be. And then third, we have to find some way to ensure that the cheating is kept to a minimum. In other words, that people aren't faking being college students or senior citizens. So we have to find some way to be able to prevent or limit resale. Um, I don't want to make these videos like too much time on talking about side topics here, but a really interesting one about this last one, just give me a minute or two just to talk about it, is that there's this interesting thing where, senior citizens, we've typically been able to identify them as, being members of the AARP. I think it's like American Association of Retired Persons. And so we know that there's these AARP discounts, right, which companies have created for people. But what's interesting is that AARP has set it up now such that anyone can join. Well, they, for a series of years, they were like lowering the age. So now I think you only have to be like 50 to be considered a senior citizen, which is like, not that I care about it, but it means I'm really close to being a senior citizen. But what it also means too is that other people, if you're younger than 50, created it such that you can still join. And you can kind of see here, let's see, well, you can't really see it too clearly here. Sorry, I don't want to waste your time with this. But anyway, businesses then are probably pretty concerned about this because what it means for them is that whereas they used to distinguish between people being old and young by whether they were a member of AARP or not, now lots of other people are signing up for AARP even though they're not really old. So as you can see here, you don't have to be a certain age. Anyone can just sign up for it. And the Wall Street Journal did a pretty interesting article talking exactly about this phenomenon of young people signing up for AARP. And that's kind of what we get to here then in slide 8, is that it's actually pretty difficult to stop it from happening. It's just really difficult to stop people from, back in the day, they used to determine whether someone was a college student or not by just whether they had a .edu email address. That's not very good science for determining who's a college student or not. Senior citizens, again, we used to be able to do it with just, are you a member of AARP or not? Again, not as useful. A company has to basically then decide how much are they going to get involved with trying to stop price discrimination. Most of the time, most businesses aren't going to spend a lot of time worrying about it too much, because basically if someone's searching out a senior citizen discount, even if they're not a senior citizen, then they've pretty much identified that they're incredibly elastic in terms of their demand. To put it another way, right? We could also look at the one that exists for people that get a military discount, right? You can kind of identify it with, does the person have a military ID? Yeah, that would be a way to do it. Are they wearing fatigues? But what would stop me, a person who's a civilian, from going on the internet and buying a uniform and wearing it? Um, and if I used it to then get a discount, should I really be stopped? Because I'm basically signaling to the firm, hey, I'm really price elastic. I'm willing to wear this uniform that's not even mine to be able to get that discount. In some sense, the company really shouldn't stop me from doing it because they're going to be able to capture that sale. Um, the other way we could do it too is the firm could try to prevent the resale by vertically integrating, meaning that they could create different stages of the production and distribution process. But again, it gets to be very costly, and the company really has to wonder whether it's worth all that effort. And it should also be noted too, just because firms charge different prices, it doesn't mean that the firm is always engaged in price discrimination. To be engaged in price discrimination means that you have taken some effort to find the price elasticity of a group of your customers. If the price differences are due to different elasticities, that's how you know that you have price discrimination. If the price differences are not just due to elasticity, then it's not price discrimination. So let's talk about some of these degrees of price discrimination. The first one would be first degree price discrimination or perfect price discrimination. This would be when there are as many prices as there are customers. Colleges are a perfect example of price discriminators in this sense because essentially they do a financial aid process to determine how much you and your family are going to be able to pay. And then they give you a discount essentially that reflects your ability to pay for the product. But what that means, the consequence of this, is that the demand curve is now my marginal revenue curve as well. Because every time I get a new customer, I just charge them their marginal willingness to pay. Second degree price discrimination is what we would call basically the quantity discount. That if you buy more of a product, you pay a lower unit cost. The reason why, right, would be if I were to draw out my demand curve here, that if I buy a lower quantity, the price is higher for that block. And if I buy a larger quantity, there's a lower price for that block. And so then essentially what I do is I get to this idea that I'm going to charge customers different prices based on how much they're willing to buy. And so second degree price discrimination, again, we can see that with, again, there's just the common name for it would be the quantity discount. In the third degree price discrimination, this is what we saw with the senior citizen discount or the college student, is that we identify a group of customers where we have some notion about what their general elasticity is going to be. And then we charge a single price for each group. So we have now three different examples of price discrimination. First degree, where there's as many customers as there's many prices as there are customers. second degree price discrimination, which we commonly know as the quantity discount, and third degree price discrimination, which is like the college student or senior citizen discount. Perfect price discrimination or first degree price discrimination is really difficult to do because you have to know a lot about each individual customer. Under first degree price discrimination, I charge each customer their reservation price, which can be very difficult to determine. I mean, if we think about how expensive it is to manage financial aid, it's a pretty lengthy process. It's a lot of information gathering. And even still, we don't always get it correct about what to charge students. But we can kind of see right here, right? My very first customer has a reservation price of $6. So I charge them $6. That first customer still pays $6. And then my second customer, who has a reservation price of $5, gets charged $5. So at the same time as the first customer is paying $6, the second customer is paying $5. About that, I'm making the video again while my daughter is in my office, and so interruptions are part of the bargain. Continuing on, my third customer has a marginal willingness to pay of $4, and so that customer is going to pay $4, while my second customer is still paying $5, and my first customer is paying $6. And again, with this price discrimination, I have to have some way to ensure that the first customer doesn't get a better deal and has to pay only $4. So I have to have some way to enforce this, right? And we do this with colleges because, right, you file financial aid and your financial aid award is unique to you. No one else gets to use your financial award. And so then we get down to the marginal cost, where the fourth customer is willing to pay $3, and that's the same as the marginal cost. But the fifth customer, who's only willing to pay $2, isn't going to get this anymore, right? Because here's my marginal revenue curve. If the marginal revenue is 2 and the marginal cost is 3, they're not going to be able to buy the product. So we're only going to go to E. Again, perfect price discrimination or first degree price discrimination is efficient. Theoretically speaking, there would be no deadweight loss. And also, no consumer surplus. Meaning that if we look at, again, the college as the example of a place where there's first degree price discrimination, then what we're seeing is a situation where every customer is paying exactly what they were willing to have paid. So that's a pretty significant consequence of this. There's no consumer surplus, there's no deadweight loss, it's all producer surplus. We don't have a lot of examples of first degree price discrimination. So really colleges are our best example. And the society tends to focus on the fact that there's no deadweight loss. As for consumers, no one benefiting, well, that's just an unfortunate consequence. Okay, so now let's start to compare these three situations that we have now. We have three competitive structures that we've looked at. The perfectly competitive structure, the single price monopolist, and the perfectly price discriminating or first degree monopolist. The competitive firm is going to charge a price of PC, and it's going to produce QC. And this is all because marginal revenue equals marginal cost right here. for the single price monopolist, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. They produce QS and charge price PS. And for the first degree price discriminator, there is no single price, right? The demand curve itself is all the prices. And they end up producing QD. So look at that. QD equals QC. So the competitive firm and the perfectly price discriminating monopolist produce exactly the same quantity, which is why, as a monopoly, it's considered not as bad. And we also have, in these two situations, we have no deadweight loss, and we have no deadweight loss. And obviously here, the price is higher, the quantity is lower, and there is a deadweight loss. So from that comparison alone, you can see that there's some distinct advantages to having, if you have to have a monopolist, it might be useful to have it be a first degree price discriminating monopolist. And you can kind of see some of this price discrimination here with this kind of Botox application. Again, I don't want to focus too much on it because we're going to do actual problems here. But the idea here would be is that you don't have a single price monopolist because they would charge price ES, right? And then you would have this degree of a deadweight loss, which would mean that people would be denied looking young. How could we have that? But if we allowed them to all charge these different prices all along the line, we could get the output to be the same as EC, E subscript C. And the marginal revenue curve would no longer be this purple line, but instead would be the same as this dark blue line. Okay. It's very, very difficult and costly to do first degree or perfect price discrimination. The transaction costs are really high. It's very difficult and costly, as a kind of last sub bullet point highlights. It's very difficult and costly to find all that information out about what your each consumer's individual price sensitivity is. I mean, we have a financial aid process, a very expensive process that determines those things. So we're just not going to do that. Most firms aren't going to do that. Instead, we use kind of cruder categories for price discrimination. And so the one obvious one would be some degree of group price discrimination. I find groups where I could either make a generalization based on what most senior citizens or what most college students are going to have as an elasticity, and I charge them uniformly that. Or I could even do it by country. I could do it by age group. Now, with any generalization, there are exceptions, right? We have poor elderly people and we have rich elderly people. We have poor college students and we have rich college students. We have rich people who are age 48 and we have poor people who are age 48. So it's really difficult, to distinguish that. But as a person with, for instance, with children, I mean, I can guarantee you I'm not going to go to the movies if I have to pay the adult price for my kids who aren't either going to appreciate or enjoy the movie. So there darn well better be a child price where I know that their elasticity is different. And again, the idea here is then that each group has its own demand curve and its own marginal revenue curve. So let's write this out here. And that's my daughter in the background singing her alphabet. Each group has their own demand and marginal revenue curve. And that the process then is that you still just set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, but you do it now for each individual group. So the idea here would be, as this example here sets up, is that I could have U.S. consumers and European consumers, and I would just separate them out based on where they live, and just identify for them a revenue curve, and then also a marginal revenue curve. And we might have different costs based on where they are, but if it's this, that's not really necessary. They might have the same cost, just like right. If I go to the movies, the cost is presumably the same across all groups, but consumers pay different prices. I don't like it when authors do this. The same with Perloff, the author of our textbook. Theoretically, strictly speaking, the cost should be the same for the US and Europe. And the reason why is because, again, price discrimination in its purest definition would be charging different prices based only on different elasticity. Sorry about that. But again, the idea here is that in its purest form, I know I'm repeating myself here, but in its purest form, price discrimination is about charging different customers based on their different elasticities, not because your customers have different costs. So I don't really like this, the way he set this up. We'll generally presume that the costs are in fact one and the same. But the process of doing this isn't any different. The idea would be is that you have different customers who have different elasticities, and thus they have different demand curves and different marginal revenue curves. And so I'm then going to basically equate each of the marginal revenue curves to the marginal cost, or M, which should be the same. I don't know why he set it up as two different. But what it does for me is it allows me now to set it up where I can find the optimal ratio between my two groups based on their different elasticities for the two groups. This is going to become a little bit clearer when we look at the problem specifically. But you basically would get the idea here that the more elastic group will pay a lower price, and the more inelastic group will pay a higher price. Which is what we typically see, right? Adults would pay a higher price to go to the movies as opposed to kids who are more poor or don't have the choices, and so they'll pay lower prices. They kept, in this example here, they kept their prices, I guess, the same here. So Perloff is, I guess, apologizing to me for what I just said. But again, you can clearly see here is that, at least for this Tesla S car, I didn't know they make an S car, but you have different demand curves and thus different elasticities. And so you have customers paying different prices. At least in this case here, what it's signifying is that the European customers are more inelastic because, relatively speaking, this demand curve is steeper than this curve. And so you would set the MR equal to the MC for each of these two markets, even though the price is the same. And then you would charge the European customers more because they are more inelastic with respect to price. So again, the idea here is that you could have your inverse demand curves, which would then mean that you could set up your marginal revenue curves, that your marginal revenue for A would be 130 minus So this would be 2 times 1.667. So 2 times, right, twice as steep. So 2 times 1.667 would be 3.334 QA. And then MR for the European market would be 230 minus 12.5 QE. Marginal cost is equal to 30 for both. So now it would set both equal to 30. Can they solve it here or no? They kind of solve it here, but not very easily. But, I mean, essentially, you would follow these steps here where I'm setting each marginal revenue curve equal to the marginal cost, where the marginal revenue curve is simply the inverse demand curve times 2, twice as steep. Solve it. And what it does is it allows me to determine the optimal price ratio between the two and find their relevant elasticities as well. And again, we can imagine other markets where this happens as well. You could imagine that a Greyhound bus has a route where senior citizens pay less. And again, the question would be is how do you know how much to charge a certain group? I suspect that most businesses aren't as scientific about this, and they just say, adults pay 11, senior citizens pay 9. It's not, that's not very scientific. I guess if I were running a business, which I'm not, but if I were running a business, I would want to do this kind of thing where you find your groups of customers, identify them, do a little bit of marketing analysis to determine what their elasticity is so that you can then use that information to find out what price they should be charged. And again, you get this description and it looks pretty clear here where you could have your different customers. Senior citizens are clearly more elastic than my adults. And they face the same price, right? Because they're sitting on the same bus that's moving forward. But the idea is that I'm now going to charge the adults $50 and my senior citizens $35. See, this right there, this right here would be the way that you would, from an economist perspective, theoretically determine what do I charge senior citizens versus adults. And I doubt in reality that most companies are doing this. I just doubt that they are. But you almost want to. You want to spend that money. It's an investment, actually. It's a good investment of your business to do that, because if you don't do it and you just charge the same price to every customer, you're going to earn less profits. And alternatively as well, you're not going to, if you just guess at the prices, you're still going to lose some senior citizens if the price is too high still, right? So even if it's at $9, just because I randomly guessed that price, I could still lose some of my senior citizens that would have otherwise bought the product. Again, most of the difficult part here is just identifying your groups of customers. It's not entirely clear to me that our old notion that senior citizens are poor and should pay less and are therefore more elastic. I think that category is becoming a little bit dated, to put it nicely. And so it's probably time for some revision if you're even going to offer that kind of thing anymore. Okay. Then our other way to do it here would be I could try to find ways where I give certain customers discounts for things. And this would be things like people having to sign up for a rebate or people using a coupon. So we make them do something, take some extra time, take an extra step. We make them do something to basically identify that they are more elastic, right? Like, so for instance, my parents, especially my mother, she uses coupons, right? So she'll cut them out or she'll use them digitally, whereas I don't. It's not that I don't like a good deal, it's just that don't, I just don't do coupons. And again, we obviously know that there are people who do that. Rebates, I mean, I'll do it if there's not a lot of effort required by me, but am I cutting out like a UPC symbol and sending in a copy of my receipt to get a rebate? Not likely, unless it's a lot of money. And so, again, we could see firms try to engage in some price discrimination by trying to get your customers to self-identify that they are more elastic. Now, unfortunately, after we deviate now from perfect price discrimination, what we're going to find is that your customers, you're going to still lose some customers who fall outside of these groups. And so you're going to start to introduce this idea that you're going to have some deadweight losses exist. Now, the other way we could do this too is that we could use, again, a variation of what we would call the quantity discount, where we charge different prices for different units of the product. And right, the idea being is that people will pay a lot for the very first few units, but that they are probably willing to pay less for additional units. But to keep getting them as customers, we should then, in essence, try to match our prices with their lower willingness to pay as we get more of the product. And we can kind of see that here, right? That as the quantity is going up, that the quantity discrimination means that at the quantity of 40, that they're less willing to pay for it. And so we should charge them less. Again, you would need to find some way to ensure that you that the blocks are kept separate. I guess the place where I see this the most is with water. So, for instance, I get my water from the Bureau of Water Supply. I have a big family. I have a family of 6, so we use a lot of water. And I pay I pay more per gallon in the very beginning, and as I use more and more water, I pay less and less per additional gallon. Another type of price discrimination that we encounter is called the two-part pricing. Now, you and I would encounter that when you buy something that then requires something else to be bought along with it. So, for instance, for me, I buy I don't have a goatee or a beard or anything like that. So I buy a razor, and I buy the razor handle as well as the blades. It's two-part pricing in the sense that I buy the blade, and then I have to buy. I buy the handle, and then I have to buy the blades as they're used up. That represents now 2 points in time where I can be charged for the product. Same with like a printer, right? I pay for the printer, but then I also pay for the ink. And so you can imagine that some printer companies might want to give away their product for free because they're going to make all their money on the ink instead. And we see this. HP is kind of notorious now for doing this thing where they're charging, where they're kind of like set up where it automatically sends you more ink when you're running out, which would then mean, so they have these things called instant ink plans. So you can imagine if you're paying $6.99 a month for printing 100 pages or 700 pages a month, $27.99, that you're also right, as you're getting this ink coming in, that you're also, or I've got to even do it for toner too, that you would then also have to pay for the printer, but that the price of the printer is going to probably reflect the fact that you've got that kind of printer. Okay, well, let me pause here. Sorry about that. I'm just looking here. Look at this. So Hewlett Packard then must have some pretty good economists working for it. So they're trying to get around this two-part plan by creating a single price. So the idea here would be is that you pick a printer, you get the ink, and you pay a price per month. So look at that. So I would select. So the idea here is that I would select a printer. All right. Okay. So whatever. I got a printer, and then I say how much I'm going to print a month, and then it looks like I just pay $8.99. So $8.99 a month. They give me the printer, I get the ink, and I just pay $9. I shouldn't pay, just pay. I pay $9 a month for a printer and the ink that comes with it. So they must be identifying the fact that, right, one of the problems that they face is that it's difficult for them to price the printer appropriately if people aren't buying like HP official ink. So for instance, I have an HP laser laser jet printer, but I don't buy the HP toner cartridge, right? So the printer itself, I think it was $100, but obviously I think it was priced at that lower price because the idea was that they were expecting I was going to buy the toner. They're probably realizing, yeah, a lot of people don't buy the toner and it's difficult for us to enforce it. So we need to abandon this two-part pricing model and do something else, which probably for all of us seems now a little bit different to try to get us to adopt a different pricing mechanism. Now, the reason why I said that, like why my printer was $100 versus the toner cartridge, was the idea was that they were going to charge me. It probably is the case that my printer was charged really darn close to marginal cost as a way to keep the price really low to get me to buy it. Because then the idea was that once I bought the printer, I could only use, or that I would have to be limited in using HP toner cartridges, which would then be priced much higher. Same with my razor handle versus the blade. I think the handle was really, really cheap, so I bought it, and now right now I have to buy the blades that specifically fit it. Same with like a phone and phone service, right? You might get the phone really, really cheap, and the carrier might subsidize it a great deal because the idea is that they want you to buy it. So again, we have these examples here of printers with printer cartridges, razor handles with razor blades, the phone with phone service, and we can go on and on where we think of two products that go together and that the firm then implements different pricing models for each of those products that are introduced. Okay, let's go here. Yeah, okay. So then we can get this other idea here too, where we have two-part pricing where we have the same customer versus different customers. So the idea here is if my customers are all the same, then the price that's charged, if the price is going to equal the marginal cost, then what I end up doing is I don't have to, I can keep my price very low and then get it on the other side of it, right? Get it on the added in product. When my customers are different, what I end up creating for myself is potentially some degree of a deadweight loss, where you're going to lose some customers who are paying a little, where they would be forced to pay more than what they value it for. So this used to be, this is a pretty interesting thing. Back when iTunes started, I remember it used to be every song cost the same. It was all 99 cents. Um, but then essentially what was realized was that different songs have different values. So basically, um, you know, uh, the company Apple now, if you look at iTunes, they don't have uniform prices anymore. So it's a pretty interesting study. The Schiller-Waldvogel study is pretty interesting because they looked at different songs and their willingness to pay. Although now things even like this are a little bit dated because people aren't downloading songs as much right now. They're streaming songs much more. But the idea here is that, if I, um, Apple isn't just selling songs, right? They're selling an ecosystem where I have Apple products that have iTunes on them and I'm listening to the music. And all of that is kind of part of that process. Sorry about that. And then we've also got this idea of the tie-in sale, where I buy one product and then I'm forced to buy another product at the same time. So these tie-in sales are kind of like my two-part pricing, but the idea is this bundling. Um, just yesterday, it was an interesting unbundled product. I was a little bit surprised by this. My wife wanted eyeglass cleaner, like the spray bottle where you clean your glasses. But what was interesting about it, so I bought it at Sam's Club. But what was interesting about it was that the spray bottle was a product separate from like the cloth, that you use after you like spray it. You use that cloth to kind of like clean it, like the microfiber cloth. They were two separate products that I had to buy, which I found incredibly odd as an economist, even just kind of thinking about this lecture yesterday before I made it today. That company, Zeiss, should have just bundled the product together because how many people are going to be buying just the spray and not the microfiber cloth? How many people are going to be just buying the microfiber cloth and not the cleaner? So it goes to this idea that um, we can bundle the packages together, which in essence, going back to that Hewlett Packard example, essentially that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to move from two-part pricing to a bundled, a tie-in sale, which again, what's your customer reaction to that going to be? Are customers going to be friendly to that tie-in sale, or are they going to like still just buying their ink and putting it in separately and whatnot? You can see these kinds of things as well, where we bundle different software together. And we can see that here, we can see that bundling going on here. Sorry about that again. But the idea here would be like when we see a bundle of products, for instance, for software, like Microsoft Office, you don't tend to buy Word or Excel separately. You tend to buy Microsoft Office, the entire package. And the reason why is that, if we're going to be bundling it, there tends to be a fairly high degree of positive correlation. If there's negative correlation, then you would keep the products separate from one another. So the only thing I can think of for this Zeiss, this eyeglass cleaner company, is that they must have done some research to find that, I don't know, maybe people buy the spray often, but they don't replace the microfiber cloth, such that they are negatively correlated strongly enough that they kept them separate. Um, Interestingly, they bundled the spray bottle with those like little packages that you open up that have like a single disposable cloth in it, which doesn't make any sense. You would think that there's unrelated products with those. And so here you can see with this positive correlation, sorry, let's go back to the negative correlation. With the negative correlation, what you can see is that the person really wants the word processor, they don't really want the spreadsheet as much. But if I price it appropriately, I can find a way to get this customer who would have only bought one of them to maybe buy both of them by pricing the bundle appropriately. Same over here, right? Here they have rather similar, not too dissimilar values for the products. So again, it all comes down to pricing the bundle appropriately to get them to buy both that they otherwise would have. So let's look at this here. I've got 4 different customers with these different reservation prices. If we just added them up, we can see what the bundles would cost. But look at this here. If I charge them $150, I could have a way to get Aaron to buy it as well as Dorothy to buy it, even though they each value a very different product. Same with if I price it at $200. I can get Bridget and Charles to buy it, but their reservation prices are not that different, too different from one another. And so this is what a firm then has to basically decide if they're going to do this bundling, is they have to decide, are they going to just charge different prices for the different products? Are they going to engage in pure bundling, which means that, the only way you can buy this product is in the bundle? Or are they going to offer mixed bundling, where you can buy the product separately or you can buy it in a bundle? All that's going to depend on the degree of correlation between the prices. And the way we're going to have to do this then, and we're going to see this in the problem set especially, is by calculating these different profit maximizing prices. And so then finally here, we look at advertising. Economists are not, I'm not in marketing. That's not my job. Advertising is a little bit difficult for me as an economist to justify if really all you're trying to do here is tell customers, from my perspective, you're telling customers how inelastic your product is. So you're creating demand in that way. Or alternatively, that you're creating demand. You're shifting the demand curve out by getting more customers. Advertising is pretty expensive. It's not, at least from my perspective, it's not even really a science. So if you're going to do it, you better have some justify. The only way you can justify it is that you've made your demand curve more inelastic, or you've shifted your demand curve to the right. And that's what you would see here. Here I've got my demand curve shifting to the right, or I would argue that the other thing we've done is that we've made it more inelastic. And that would kind of define for us how much we should advertise. Okay, so that kind of wraps up at least the theory from this chapter. We're going to see more of the applications of this when I go over problems for this chapter.